Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. It's Wednesday and the patch is actually already live, so let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and talk through the top 5 changes of patch 14.3. I'll let you guys know what the biggest changes were on this week's patch and what you can be looking forward to in the coming weeks. 14.3 is just a continued part of Riot's adjustment following the new season going live. There are a lot of buffs to champions that are suffering because their itemization changed, and there are a lot of nerfs to champions who got nerfs because their itemization is now too good. With all that said though, let's go ahead and start talking about some of that itemization, scrolling all the way on down here to the number 5 change, the changes to Stridebreaker. Now, Stridebreaker's been in a really weird spot following the changes. I really thought this item was still going to be extremely strong following the adjustment. After all, most of its other mythic competition in the fighter pool was removed, but people haven't really been building Stridebreaker at all following the new patch. I guess for whatever reason, its stats or active just aren't as enticing as they were previously. As a result, Riot are trying to find a way to buff it such that it doesn't become a stat stick, but also that it becomes attractive to the same kinds of champions that were building it previously. The way they did this is actually quite clever. It now builds out of Tiamat and is a Tiamat item. This means that it does have the AoE damage on hit, as well as the AoE damage on the item activation, plus the slow is still there. In general, this means that the item is a little bit more enticing for some other champions that want it for the wave clear or on-hit damage that it provides, in addition to the slowing passive. This also means that you can't stack it with some of the other items, meaning that you can't use Stridebreaker plus a Tiamat item for maximum DPS by pressing 2 item actives. Instead, you're stuck with just the singular one. I think this is a very interesting change that should help make Stridebreaker a little bit more enticing for the champions that were building it previously, but we'll see if it ends up shaking out at the end of the day. Moving on to the number 4 changes here, I want to talk about the Pyke buffs. Now, Pyke has been struggling to stay above water in 14.1, and he's been nerfed even further as of 14.2. As a result, Riot are throwing him some pretty nice little buffs here, and even though you may be looking at these saying, oh my god, this is crazy, everything is getting buffed, it's not that big of a deal at the end of the day. Bone Skewer getting a little bit more bonus AD ratio is nice, but the biggest thing is the mana cost reduction, which should allow Pyke to go fishing a little bit more than he does normally, as well as the damage bump on Phantom Undertow. This is a very spicy damage bump. It's up by like 35 at max rank, but because it's a second max, this means that you're not really benefiting from it until level 13, and the damage is actually nerfed a little bit earlier in the game. So it's not going to be as impactful earlier on, but it will scale a little bit better in the later stages. The spiciest change for me is the change to Ghost Water Dive. The bonus movement speed, the flat percentage increase, as well as the lethality scaling have both been buffed. So Pyke will be turbo fast when he's got a couple lethality items under his belt, especially if he's building the new and improved Youmuu's Ghost Blade. As a result, I think Pyke should feel much better on this patch. I don't think he'll be crazy strong by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly he'll be a little bit better and more people will be inclined to play him on 14.3. Moving on to the number 3 changes here, we're going to be talking about the Maokai changes. Maokai support has been extremely strong over the last couple of patches. I think he's like the strongest performing support in the game as of this patch, and as a result, Riot are taking him down a peg on 14.3, but trying to account for his power in the top lane and jungle because they don't want that to be unplayable. The changes here, I think, are very well targeted at support Maokai specifically. The base mana regen going down means that because the support item scales with a percentage of your current mana regen, that it nerfs Maokai's affinity for that item in particular, as well as just saying you have less mana to work with overall. Sapling Toss now has a longer cooldown at early ranks. You have to put points into it to get benefits from it, and the mana cost is also up by a substantial margin at all ranks, meaning that you're going to get a lot fewer Sapling Tosses overall, and fewer Sapling Tosses further apart because of the cooldown change here. Sap Magic has also been changed here very slightly. It now no longer has a flat amount of healing. It only scales based on your maximum health and scales a little bit based on level. This means that support Maokai, who's not really building health, isn't going to benefit as much from the healing. He'll be squishier overall. And the biggest thing here for me, though, is the changes to Bramble Smash. If you're a top lane or jungle Maokai player, these changes are massive because a full second off the cooldown at early ranks means that you get more of them, and the mana cost has literally been reduced by 20. You are going to get a ton more Bramble Smashes than you used to before, coming much closer together, and as a result, in the top lane and jungle, Maokai is overall feeling okay about these changes. Support Maokai is really the one who's not having as good of a time, but honestly, it was too strong, and I think these changes are very well targeted. I think if you're support Maokai, it's still playable, just not as good as it was before. Meanwhile, top lane Maokai and jungle Maokai should be feeling generally fine on this patch, and I think definitely it's worth checking out if you haven't played it already. Moving on to the number 2 changes here, I want to talk about the Yorick buffs. Now, these are some really nice changes for a champion that I didn't think needed changes, but that Riot are giving changes regardless, and I'm a big fan of these, honestly. Mostly what Riot are trying to do is buff up the Bruiser build of Yorick. For a while, Lethality's been his best build, but Riot are throwing Bruiser Yorick a bone, mostly here with the change to Yorick's Q. The healing is now a flat amount that scales based on missing health and is halved versus non-champions. It no longer doubles when you're below 50% HP. This means that as long as you're able to continuously bonk enemy champions with your shovel, you will continue to sustain through teamfights. This is a big deal for a Bruiser Yorick who has more health he can lose and therefore can get more healing off of it versus a Lethality Yorick who doesn't have that much health and is more inclined to die before the heal actually comes up. As well as the mana cost going down, it's only by 5, but this matters on a spammable ability like Last Rites. It adds up significantly over time. It means that you generally have more mana for stuff overall. The Morning Mist cast time going down by a little bit should make it feel a little bit snappier as well. But also I want to highlight the changes to Yorick's summons here. The summon leash range has been reduced. This means that your summons won't get as far away from you before they try to turn around and follow you. And the summons now gain bonus movement speed when returning to Yorick. It's based on the distance, so if a summon is at max leash range, it will be zooming the first couple of seconds and then slow down as it gets closer to Yorick. But it generally means that your manipulation of the Maiden should be much better, as well as keeping your Mistwalkers closer to you if you're doing something like jungling Yorick. And speaking of the Maiden, this initially looks like a nerf here, but it's actually not a nerf because it now no longer has a 2-second cooldown. You can continuously proc this max health damage as long as you're hanging in a fight. This means that if you build an item with incidental attack speed, like Trinity Force, for example, you can constantly be proccing that damage as opposed to having to whack someone once and then wait for 2 seconds for you to be able to do it again. Huge changes for Yorick, especially for the Bruiser Yorick build. Very excited to give this champion a try following the patch going live, and you can definitely expect to see more Yoricks in your own games. Finally, the number 1 change on this week's patch are the buffs to Aurelion Sol. Now, I want to highlight real quick, he has already been hotfix buffed, or hotfix nerfed, I should say, so don't worry too much about what you read here. It's not entirely true, but I still want to talk about these because they are massive for the champion and the way in which he plays right now. Part of the issue with Aurelion Sol right now is that he plays extremely passively. The only thing he does in lane is throw his E down on the minion wave and then breathe light onto the minions and just kind of passively farm stacks like that without having to actually interact with his lane opponent at all. This is fine, but not particularly fun, and Riot want Aurelion Sol to be interacting with his enemies more, hence the changes here. The change to his E means that generally speaking, he's going to get fewer stacks overall from his E. It's not a huge deal because most of these are for large monsters, cannon minions, that kind of thing, but it does mean that he'll get fewer incidental stacks for just like randomly using his E, and instead he'll have to rely on his Q to get stacks. This number is not accurate. It's instead only 2 stacks per champion burst, but that still matters overall. But the mana cost per second change did stick. This means that generally Aurelion Sol should be much more incentivized to use his Q in lane to try and get burst to get damage down. He's going to be less punished for it mana-wise. Meanwhile, Astral Flight has a ton of changes here as well that are very impactful. The cooldown has been decreased as well as the mana cost. This number actually is incorrect. It's gone the other direction. The bonus damage has been nerfed actually following the hotfix. So it should feel even weaker than it did on 14.2. But this is sort of irrelevant. Generally, the cooldown and the mana cost are the important parts here because it means that Aurelion Sol is much more incentivized to use this. He can use it in lane if he just wants to benefit from the increased damage and range. He is much more incentivized to roam with this ability because he can use it to get back to lane, shove a wave, and then use it again immediately to start going to another lane. It should help bring back the sort of shove and roam playstyle that Aurelion Sol had previously, but that he hasn't really been opting into of late. Very excited about these changes overall. I think they should really revitalize the champion and make him feel much better to play. Naturally, they landed a little strong, but I think overall it will end up being okay in the long run. And that is going to be it for me today, guys. Those are the top 5 changes of patch 14.3. Let me know what you're most excited for down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.